I'm going to need you to step aside so we can straighten this out, unless, of course, you intend to cause trouble for the rest of business class," said the chief flight attendant, her voice slicing through the muted shuffle of passengers tucking up duffel bags and jackets. Overhead, the click and sigh of luggage bins settling were so precise it almost sounded choreographed. The glare off the windows spilled rectangular light over the seatbacks, catching the torn edge of a folded boarding pass poking from a uniform pocket. 17 rows away, a boy in red Crocs stared openly, half buried in a turquoise fleece. Malcolm pressed his thumb to the fine seam of his leather messenger bag and closed his legal pad with a practiced snap. A draft memo headed from Special Projects slipped forward, but he tapped it back beneath a folder marked in 3 languages. He wore a simple navy suit, undistinguished in this crowd, his posture somewhere between jet-lagged and tense. On the tray beside his untouched glass of water sat a USB drive and a black pen, remnants from an overnight layover in Miami he'd spent in the Admiral's Club reviewing a binder he now kept zipped shut. The chief flight attendant hovered close, eyes raking over the overhead panel as if searching for some defect only she could see. "We did not receive confirmation for your special meal request, sir," she announced, loud enough for 2 nearby passengers to flinch. Her eyes flicked to his small plate of nuts. "It's best you not consume anything until we can verify whether it's safe for your dietary needs." She said dietary needs, as if it required italics. A man in a seafoam sport coat leaned back to make room, raising his magazine just enough to observe but not enough to intervene. The air purifiers pulsed a faint citrus tang. "What exactly are you verifying?" Malcolm asked, voice even. Her lips held motionless for a beat longer than necessary. "We have a process for this," she replied. "You can either cooperate or I can have security escort you off before we close the door." Malcolm inhaled, jaw moving once as he took in the tidy row of passenger faces, the subtle pressure in his chest. A vibrating pulse began at his wrist, his smartwatch blinking an event alert in soft blue. He ignored it. Instead, he returned his pen to the folder and set the legal pad at a meticulous 60-degree angle. The seatbelt light chimed. Somewhere in the terminal, a gate agent's voice, muffled by plexiglass, counted off in Spanish. The world, restless and noisy, pressed forward as the flight attendant's heels tapped once, then again. One last glance, one more loop. "Sir, your meal wasn't prepared." The chief Fa's voice landed flat, as if already apologizing to someone in the next row. "I'll need to see your ticket and perhaps your allergy card if you have one handy. It's for your own well-being, of course. We had a mix-up in catering this evening for select passengers. Happens more often than people think." Her voice rose for the last part, letting nearby travelers bear witness. Malcolm, expression unreadable, pivoted the physical ticket upward between thumb and forefinger. The paper trembled minutely, as if echoing whatever tension ran under his skin. Across the aisle, the seatback television flickered the airline logo. Malcolm's mind, for a split second, flashed not to the flight but to a cluttered DC apartment, a keys-in-hand suit jacket thrown over the kitchen chair. "A call he'd missed at 2 a.m. Foreign service is the only thing I know," he had said to his mentor 3 weeks earlier. A mentor who hadn't answered since. He'd lost his position, not a soul here knew. A steward approached, whispering to the chief in measured Korean, glancing now and again at Malcolm. A memory, at the American Library in Paris, a woman had once asked him to help her recover a lost passport. He'd done it quietly, no spectacle. He knew how to move things quietly. "You don't have a shellfish allergy, do you?" the chief Fa demanded, her tone sharpened with something closer to accusation than concern. Malcolm shook his head once. "No shellfish allergy, not that it matters." She made a quick note on her tablet, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone who needed no oversight. An off-duty pilot, crossing to seat his partner and a drowsy daughter, paused, gaze lingering on the scene before continuing, only to hesitate. His brow furrowed as he returned and quietly began recording with his phone face down, peeked up between finger gaps. The livestream started with all of 17 viewers, mostly avatars and one bored airline staffer, watching in real time. The feed captured Malcolm's upturned ticket, the narrowed eyes of the flight attendant, and the well-heeled passenger shifting in his seat. Let's just be clear, this is not about food. Malcolm's words were a thread pulled taut, stark against the white noise of boarding. Everything's about safety and process, sir, the chief Fa replied, her eyes barely blinking. A woman in the rear, arms crossed, said loud enough for half the cabin to pick up. What's the big deal if there was a mistake? Others go hungry all the time. The steward assisting the chief looked away. The pilot, recording, caught his partner's anxious expression. The tension broke into something sharper. A heavy pause bent the air. Malcolm pressed his knuckles white against the armrest. For the briefest instant, his hand hovered over his satchel as though to stand and abandon the entire scene, to melt into indistinguishable business-class shadows rather than be the focus of this theater. But his phone buzzed again. A calendar event with a cryptic NSF headline and a digital clock crawling forward on his lock screen. He flexed his hand, slow, deliberate breaths doing nothing for his heartbeat. A pair of brown eyes peered over the seat in front. A young boy wordlessly held up a packet of pretzels, silent solidarity, that nameless kid trust. The movement, so unexpected, tethered Malcolm back. He exhaled, whispered, "Thank you," and drew his hand away from his bag. Instead, he sat upright, reset his laptop open on his tray, a file labeled conference draft glowing beneath the airline's logo. The chief Fa, interpreting Malcolm's silence as acquiescence, snapped her tablet shut. "We're nearly ready for pushback. It might be best for you to consider alternate arrangements for the evening. We can always find you a seat in the main cabin if things can't be resolved." He didn't flinch. "I'll wait here." The clocks, physical and digital, ticked over. The slow burn of delay threaded the air. Something inevitable moved closer. The intercom sputtered. "Doors will be closing in 5 minutes. All passengers take your assigned seats," came the drone from the gate area, layered with background chatter and ground crew banter. The Fa's eyes darted from her phone to the entryway. The seatbelt signs blinked, now edged in crimson. The restlessness of the crew's footsteps seemed sharper, every clipped exchange about stowage and manifest checks rising above the hum. Malcolm's laptop, forgotten for 2 minutes, flickered a pulsing reminder. Grant submission deadline 90 minutes. A single file, unsent, sprawled across the desktop. He closed his eyes for a half-second and shot a text. "Flight delayed. Will submit soon." The tray table scuffed as he moved, drawing the attention of the chief Fa, who now stood back with folded arms, nervously drumming a lanyard between her fingers. The pilot's livestream count ramped up, now 46. Anonymous names in the comments typed, "He got moved yet." "And policy's policy, right?" The pilot's face appeared, intent, silently mirroring the blink of the phone's notification light. A new figure stepped into the aisle, the captain, uniform flawless but his expression unreadable. "There's a concern here." His words fell with mechanical precision. The chief Fa pivoted. "This passenger won't comply with catering procedures. I've explained clearly about process. We don't want to delay departure for everyone." The captain nodded to Malcolm. "Is that accurate?" Malcolm replied, the edge of his voice sanded down by exhaustion. "All I requested was the meal ordered with this ticket. I have confirmation in my reservation and email. No allergy, no health risk. It's somewhere here." The captain glanced at the email Malcolm had preloaded, the details crisp and traceable. With measured focus, Malcolm asked, "Does your policy require meal withholding if there is no dietary risk and documentation is in order? Section D-17 of your in-flight handbook covers this, I believe." The captain's eyebrow lifted, surprise just visible. He looked back to the chief Fa. "You certain you followed procedure?" A pause. The chief's knuckles pressed white against her clipboard. Yes." He, was insistent. and our new guidelines require extra confirmation on upgrades. Sometimes errors occur when passengers switch classes." The captain twisted his mouth. "File a 2-minute report now. We'll review and resolve in the air." His tone was neutral, but his glance at Malcolm held a new cautiousness. "Viewer count, 83 and surging." The captain stepped away, phone in hand. He angled his body, lips moving just out of the cabin audio. Only snatches could be heard. "Yes, right now. No, it's not allergies. Passenger documentation. Section D17, I know what it says. On record." Each phrase was punctuated by the up-tempo tap of his pen on the wall. Sweat glistened at his temple. He stiffened, then nodded, suppressing a visible sigh. His eyes slid back to Malcolm, gaze silent, but newly respectful, before refocusing on the chief Fa. "Double-check with catering, please." The Fa, cheeks tinged with heat, licked her lower lip and typed furiously on her phone. Her tone now caught, less certain. "I just want to ensure no one's at risk tonight." She adjusted her blouse, the wings of her pin shifting under the plastic. The off-duty pilot live-streamed, eyes darting between his phone and the drama. 37 new comments appeared. "Is that legal?" He asked about policy. "Did you see that?" For the first time, Malcolm didn't touch his bag or notebook. He laced his hands, fingers still. Around them, the cabin was pre-takeoff still. A steward from the rear returned. "Man in 2A," he stage whispered to the captain, "has all required credentials. Meals not found in inventory, but flight manifest notes it. System error." The authorities' focus cut to the chief Fa. "You understand how that sounds?" She blinked, adjusted her lanyard, cheeks drawn tight as she stammered. "WEUM. Sometimes have to be extra careful when the manifest's mixed. Passenger lists certain flags, you know." He watched her for a hard moment. The minutes ticked in silence. Then bootsteps echoed from the entryway. The captain, now more rigid, excused himself and slid into the nearest secure phone corner, dialing anew. His side of the call played out in low altitudes and clipped sentences. "I've got the in-flight handbook here. Section D17 requested by the passenger. Yes, he knows it. Meal's an issue. Well, he's quoting policy. I'd like legal on standby." He checked over his shoulder, jaw muscle flickering. In the window reflection, the chief Fa straightened, tugged her sleeve and flexed her left hand. The off-duty pilot, watching it unfold, mouthed "no way" to his partner as he angled for a clearer video shot, boosting the feed. The count tipped 112. Major blogs picked up the clip within minutes. The word handbook trended, people scrolled. From his seat, Malcolm uncapped his pen, rolling it flat once, twice, aligning it perfectly atop a yellow legal pad. An anchor point. The captain, voice lower, "You're sure about the author?" His stance shifted, spine more upright now, concern flickering fast. Another steward carrying a tray dropped a napkin, a slip, eyes averted. He kept walking. Malcolm reached for water, hand steady. Not a single soul could escape the tightness compressing the aisle. Every word, every inhale cost something. A new sound, text ping, the captain's personal phone on speaker, high-level leadership's number lighting the screen. He fumbled it, thumb shaking. The captain's voice. "Hello? Yes." He did quote the section by number. No, he didn't mention name. 3 heartbeats unfilled. The captain's face hardened, eyes wide. "Understood." He disconnected. This time when he turned, he faced the cabin, voice loud enough for everyone within reach. "Just to clarify, and I want it on record, the gentleman here is Malcolm Turner, correct?" The chief Fa's grip loosened. "Why, yes, he gave that name a check-in." A pause, 2 seats up, a passenger nearly stood. The pilot's phone angled up. The comments popped. "Wait, that's the author. Did he write the training manual?" The captain exhaled. "Malcolm Turner is, as your own records note, the writer of Unseen Skies, Ethical Conduct on International Flights, the same book your team has on required reading." No one immediately spoke. The seatbelt lights buzzed in precise synchrony. A bag thudded softly into place in the overhead, echoing across compartments. The captain's phone pinged a new text, all caps from leadership. Subject is also recipient for National Science Fund review. Do not detain, immediate compliance required. The chief Fa, face blanched now, mouth slightly ajar, sagged an inch as the information tumbled through layers of ambition and protocol. Her knees seemed unsteady. One hand reached for the aisle wall, missing the padded edge. Sweat sparkled near her temple. 3 bystanders who'd previously murmured agreement with policy traced their shoelaces, screens face down, blush rising. Nobody met her eyes. Malcolm collected his pen, notepad, and tablet. He stood quietly. Policies are made to serve, never to exclude. The aisle remained cloaked in something heavier than silence. No one moved. He collected his belongings, moved toward the front. A woman who'd shaken her head earlier dipped her chin to her chest. A teenage passenger blocked her view with her hoodie. A man in the second row pocketed his phone, hot with the accusation of his own inaction. Malcolm paused at the door as the chief Fa attempted to catch his gaze. He offered a simple, unyielding, "I hope your standards won't be measured solely by how loudly you enforce them." The pilot live-streamed from his seat. The comment thread soared past 12,000. Across the jet bridge, names and headlines blipped on screens as media reached out. The Fa fell into the first available jump seat, head bent. 2 junior crew members passing by eyed her, then turned away. Malcolm stepped onto the jet bridge, the pressurized warmth of the cabin replaced by the hollow chill of fluorescent-lit transit. Each stride was measured, bag balanced easily, steps echoing as he left 24 witnesses in their own reckoning. At the terminal entrance, an airline executive, phone in hand, stood perfectly still. "Mr. Turner, on behalf of the airline, I truly apologize. There's no excuse. I assure you we'll." Malcolm raised a palm in subtle warning. "Address the issue, not just the incident." The executive sputtered, "Of course that's." But Malcolm was already walking away, shoes clicking over linoleum. Outside, a black sedan waited curbside. The driver acknowledged Malcolm with a nod and opened the door. Inside, Malcolm dialed a number. "Yes, I'm en route. Submission will be done within the next hour. Please confirm the panel is convening at the scheduled time." The reply, "Confirmed. Everything's on track. Anything else you need?" He replied, "Just time. I'm back to work." He looked out at the bouncing city lights. Lines blurred, but the world spun on. At midday the following afternoon, inside a polished airline boardroom 1,500 miles away, a CEO hunched over a laptop tuned to news feeds. The general counsel, flanked by a compliance chief and a pair of junior VPs, held up a printout. Within 12 hours, Turner's video hit 1.3 million views. DOJ responded in 3. The pilot's ID confirmed. Our own staff distributed this to 300 senior crew. Consensus is, the termination is public and immediate. The CCO spoke, voice dry from overnight crisis meetings. "We lost 17.9% of our market cap. That's over $850 million wiped out before closing. Investor calls nonstop. Board wants a settlement number and system changes by Friday or heads roll." CEO defeated. Consent decree. Fire the chief Fa now. Review all bias protocols. Run external audits and swap required reading for Turner's actual new text. Don't fight. Clean house. General counsel typed. Final offer. Settlement at $6.2 million. Announced new diversity board 42 seats. Every route covered. Compliance lead. Update staff. Annual protocol refreshed. E-learning deployed to 14,000 worldwide. Tell DOJ we'll take their monitor for 3 years. No one argued. What began in a cabin now echoed in every conference line, every ticker, every investor's trembling dashboard. At 7 p.m., broadcast anchors, faces red stern as the screen ticker scrolled. Airline issues historic consent decree, fires chief Fa after viral incident. Over 23 million hashtag views in 36 hours. DOJ to monitor compliance, industry-wide reforms pledged by quarter. The pilot's video froze on a frame where Malcolm looked directly at the lens. The comments, locked by moderators, hovered at 180,000. In a glass-walled conference room halfway around the world, Malcolm stepped in, accepted a handshake from a grant coordinator and set his satchel aside without looking back. A young colleague murmured, "Saw you everywhere last night, the flight." Malcolm only shook his head. "You have the submission ready," she nodded. "One more appendix and we're set." They faced the screen together, readying for the next challenge. From that spark of injustice, numbers hammered change into stone. 17.9% drop, $850 million lost on the market, $6.2 million settlement, 42 new diversity seats, 14,000 staff trained, each statistical proof a warning into the wind. 6 months passed. This time Malcolm took a red-eye to Lima. New airline, new crew. The chief flight attendant, an older man with silver-edged hair, greeted every business-class guest without a trace of guarded inspection. When he reached Malcolm's row, he smiled, "Mr. Turner, thank you for flying with us. If you need anything, just press the call button." Turner nodded, "Thank you, I appreciate it." Systems are built on silent agreements to look past, to let slide, to see only what's comfortable. But every one of those systems is shaped in the end by what a single person refuses to accept. The lesson isn't just for the worst actor. It's for the watcher who records, the traveler who speaks up, the leader who decides what story to believe. Justice isn't a headline. It's a boundary drawn and redrawn every single day. If you found this story unsettling or necessary, let it stay with you each time you step onto a plane or witness a so-called small injustice in public. Subscribe to stay with these stories for the questions they plant and the accountability they demand. And if you know someone who needs to see the world as it is and as it could be, share this with them. Let the quietest fact echo longest: dignity outlasts policy. Malcolm had almost forgotten what it was like to pass through an airport without the prickle of surveillance, without feeling that a tenuous piece balanced on the tip of an overlooked detail. He watched Luz, his research associate, adjust the blue lanyard that held her credentials. Her shoulders were set with the confident posture of someone who had never watched her name trend for all the wrong reasons. Their flight from Bogota to Lima was uneventful, the cabin's hush broken only by the clink of coffee cups and low, accented chatter. Malcolm tapped out a string of bullet points on his tablet, checking the stylistic consistency between the English and Spanish grand abstracts. He still caught his own reflection in the cabin window sometimes, half expecting to see the stiff, defensive lines of his face from that night a season ago. Mouth pressed thin, patience worn to sinew. But now, if anything, he just looked tired. "Did you want to review the notes again before the panel?" Luz asked when they landed. Her voice was careful, maybe still a fraction reverent. The past months had reshaped him in reputation, but the iron at his core remained. Malcolm angled his tablet away from the harsh airport fluorescence. "No, I trust your draft." His gaze drifted to the slow parade of arriving passengers, a silent current of hope and exhaustion. An hour later, they sat under a giant mural at Pontificia Universidad. The panel's moderator, heavyset and cheerful, patted Malcolm's forearm. "It's an honor, Professor Turner. I look forward to your keynote. There is much buzz about everything." She did not say viral or scandal or policy. Word of his ordeal seemed to follow him less now. Not forgotten, but assimilated. A parable people invoked in workshops, in softening a bureaucrat's tone, in the cautious, skeptical glances exchanged between colleagues in staff meetings. Some stopped to introduce themselves, apologetic, eager, shy, grateful. Others only nodded, as if being in the same room might shift their own gravity. After the last presentation, Luz brought him a small cup of thick, sweet coffee. "I think we're ready," she said. "That last question about anti-bias curriculum, do you want to field it first or let Dr. Rojo take the lead?" Malcolm smiled, a flicker of warmth unfreezing his features. "You start, then I'll give context." He listened as Luz spoke, clear, fluent, certain. She'd been a timid presenter before. Now she was clean-lined and measured, able to cite outcomes and cite precedent, her voice inflected with the subtle charge of someone who knew the rules had changed and that she'd helped nudge them. A member of the Peruvian Education Committee raised his hand. "Professor Turner, your work has been cited, even in aviation here. We thank you for that. But do you think the reforms are more than surface level? Will things really be different next time?" Malcolm traced a finger down the side of his mug. "Rules are only as strong as their memory. Policy can anchor us, but culture, real culture, changes only when someone refuses to move aside for what's comfortable. What happened wasn't a single person's fault, but it didn't need to take headlines for people to care." He let the words hang, unafraid of the weight they carried across the auditorium's hush. Someone else asked, "And dignity? What about for those who can't make their story so public, for those who remain unseen?" He answered softly, "Visibility is protection, but it's also a duty. The quieter the story, the more it matters who listens. The real test is whether you will speak for them or only for yourself when it's safe." There was no applause. Instead, the silence deepened, a silence that tasted at its rich center of change. Malcolm's flight home brought him through Atlanta. He paused at the security checkpoint, where a TSA agent beckoned him forward. The man's uniform was rumpled at the sleeves, glasses slipping down his nose. "Passport, please." Malcolm handed it over, expecting the perfunctory scan, the unsmiling return. Instead, the agent double-checked the photo and leaned a little closer. "You're that writer, Turner. Flew out of Miami last year, right?" Malcolm nodded, wary. "Just wanted to say my cousin's a gate agent. After all that happened, they swapped out most of her old training. She said the new stuff is actually decent now, makes her feel like if she speaks up, someone will back her instead of," the agent hesitated, searching for the word, "sweeping it under the rug. So I guess thanks." For once, Malcolm didn't deflect. "I'm glad it helped." "Have a safe flight, sir." The world still spun on, hurried and impersonal, but sometimes it noticed itself, made a small promise not to forget. Later that night, feet aching from 3 connections and worn carpeted corridors, Malcolm finally slipped his shoes off in his apartment. The familiar shadows greeted him, the desk covered in neat stacks, the wall still bristling with annotated flight maps, and a dozen certificates framed less out of pride than as reminders. His phone pinged, a scheduled call, blocky time zone math jumping out at him. He thumbed accept. It was the CEO of the airline's diversity board, her voice rich with restrained excitement. "Mr. Turner, we're finalizing our first annual report and we'd like your input if you have time." Malcolm hesitated, looking for the exhaustion in his bones. Instead, he found a stubborn, flickering energy, the same that had kept him upright in that aisle under all those stares. "I have a half hour," he agreed. "Send the draft." A second call queued as they wrapped up. This time the voice was familiar. Jordan, his one-time mentor, absent so long he wondered if he'd conjured her up. "Heard your story again today," she said, warm and sly. "I'm teaching a section on organizational ethics this summer. Want a guest lecture?" He laughed, not bitter, not armored. "Only if you promise to let me challenge your syllabus." "Wouldn't have it any other way." He hung up, reaching for an apple, half dizzy with the new rhythm of things. There would always be another flight, another policy, another silence to break. At the next diversity board meeting, held in a glassy midtown conference suite, Malcolm listened, quiet and analytic, as the regional managers took turns reporting out their successes and backslides. A young manager, face just breaking out of adolescence, laid out the numbers. "We've seen a 5% drop in passenger complaints since last quarter, especially in premium cabins, but the anonymous feedback says some senior crews still bristle at the reforms." The CEO nodded. "Change doesn't happen overnight. What about the mentorship program?" The manager's eyes brightened. 67 new mentees matched. The retention rate is the highest we've seen. Malcolm spoke just once when the conversation circled to accountability. Let's not mistake compliance for understanding. Numbers reassure, but they can't replace candor with the people we serve. Be transparent with the public. Don't teach your crews what not to say, teach them how to see. His words were scribbled into the minutes. Afterwards, the CEO lingered as the room emptied. "Do you regret it?" she asked him quietly. Malcolm, packing his bag, shook his head. "If I hadn't been noticed, none of this would have happened. But I regret that it takes an incident and a headline for people to care." She studied him. "Maybe next time it won't." He let the possibility buoy him a little. Months and then another year. Malcolm flew less now, but when he did, his name was recognized in subtle ways. Coffee served with a small thank you note tucked under the cup. A gate agent who quietly ushered him into a quieter lounge after a delay, matching his pace. No fanfare. None of it felt unearned exactly, but each gesture reminded him that privilege and repair could sometimes blur. He tried to accept the courtesy with humility. One afternoon, as he walked the halls of the Department of Transportation, now as a policy consultant rather than a petitioner, he passed by a framed photograph. His own face stared out, standing in that infamous aisle, next to a quote they'd pulled from social media. "Dignity outlasts policy." He almost laughed at the crispness of the frame, the way institutions could so quickly canonize what they'd only days before resisted. "Can you believe the government's using that as their campaign?" Luz said, joining him, her tone teasing but affectionate. "Conviction on a coffee mug," he replied wryly. But the world was, incrementally, moving in the direction he'd nudged it. Not everything changed, of course. He heard of a ground agent in Denver disciplined for raising a similar objection. An apology came, belatedly, only after public outcry. He watched as airlines in other countries bristled against the emerging norms. There were always holdouts, people, systems, habits. Still, the trend line bent toward awareness. Sometimes travel brought memories close. On a flight to Zurich, the chief flight attendant brought him a meal personally. "No confusion this time," she said, smiling. "I read your handbook." Her accent was soft, and behind her, Malcolm caught the flash of the red Crocs of a passing boy, who grinned and held up a packet of pretzels. He touched the packet with a fingertip. "Thank you," he said, meaning it every syllable. He watched the boy scamper off and thought, maybe this is how it grows. Not with declarations, but in the small retracings of kindness. Back at home, sorting through his mail, Malcolm found a thick envelope bearing the letterhead of a law clinic. Inside was a thank you from a student legal advocacy group. "Your story made it possible for us to negotiate a new air travel bill of rights. We'll keep pushing, even when no one is watching." He set the letter on his desk, beside Luz's latest grant report and Jordan's spring syllabus, spread out and color-coded. He took in the quiet, the sun slanting across the floorboards, the sound of life outside, bus brakes, city birds, someone's distant music. Change was slow and uneven, often invisible, yet here he was, witness and driver both. A clatter downstairs. The building's new maintenance manager, Miguel, called up, "Mr. Turner, package for you." Malcolm hurried down. Miguel, a man in a faded soccer jersey and blue cap, handed him a small box and then lingered. "Saw you on TV, you know." Malcolm, sheepish but smiling, shrugged. "I get that a lot, hopefully for good reasons these days. They talk about rules, rights, airline stuff, but mostly you just looked like you didn't want to back down." Malcolm's gaze softened. "Sometimes that's all you can do." Miguel grinned. "Well, it helped me out. My sister got bumped from her flight, but now they have to listen, so thanks." He watched Miguel leave, feeling the warm ache of responsibility settle around his shoulders. The story, it seemed, was never quite finished. It only handed itself over from voice to voice, like a package set gently into one's arms. Weeks later, Malcolm traveled to D.C. for a summit on passenger rights. The room was crowded, a mix of government, industry, and NGOs. Some faces were welcoming. A few still bristled with institutional wariness, The old guard's resistance faded, but never vanished. After his panel, a young woman in a wheelchair approached, her badge reading Aisha D., advocacy intern. "I just wanted to say, that day you didn't move. You made it easier for us to argue for accessible travel, too. It all connects, doesn't it? What's fair for one should be fair for everyone." He nodded, voice quiet. "Hold on to that, because the moment you let it slide for someone else, you'll never remember where you drew the line." They exchanged cards. Later, he would see her name on a draft bill, a clause that tracked his own language. The details, the length and breadth of codes, the meaning of policy, might change, but the line remained. Fairness, etched and re-etched, bold enough to withstand the next tempest. The world kept moving. News cycles spun away to politics, tech, even another airline incident, the familiar outrage, the cycle of apology and reform. Malcolm watched each story break and fade, knowing some lessons would not outlast public memory. But he also saw signs of persistence. New training videos in airports, more diverse cabin crews, a visible shift in the way authority greeted the vulnerable. He met Jordan again, over coffee in Georgetown, where cherry blossoms began to litter the sidewalks. "Syllabus ready," she teased. He handed over a USB stick, ready and annotated. Jordan laughed, then grew reflective. "You changed more than airlines, you know." He looked across the cafe at a young father coaxing a toddler into a booster chair. "Maybe," Malcolm said, "but mostly I reminded people what they should have already known." They drank their coffee in companionable silence. 2 years on at a regional university, Luz, now Dr. Gonzalez, showed her first-year ethics in public policy class a short documentary including clips from the night Malcolm refused to yield his seat, the aftermath that rewrote an industry. She watched their faces change, first skepticism, then something approaching resolve. A student raised his hand, cheeks flushed. "So if we see something, does it even matter if we're not the ones at the center?" Luz smiled, remembering her own uncertainty. "It always matters, not just for them, for you, for everyone who could one day find themselves at that center too." She sent Malcolm a message that night, subject line, "Ripples." It was brief, just a snapshot of her students, hands raised, debate in motion. "Change keeps growing even when you're not looking." He answered, "That's all I ever wanted." From his window one night, Malcolm watched a plane cross the city's yellow haze, small and certain. Maybe, somewhere inside, someone was quietly refusing to look away, or to accept the wrong seat, or to stay silent instead of speaking for a stranger. He pulled the curtain closed, the city in soft relief behind the glass. Stories like his, he realized, were never just about someone losing and someone winning. They were about a moment when private conviction broke the surface, and everyone was forced to redraw what counted as enough. He thought of the boy and the pretzels, of the pilot who risked his phone, of the weary crew learning lines they would never quite believe until a passenger stood their ground. Somewhere dignity was outlasting policy. Somewhere the echo still lingered. And somewhere, even now, the world edged closer to what it could be, for anyone willing to hold the line until justice caught up.